Recording started.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's lovely to see you. Welcome to our wrap-up session. I'm going to actually share my screen as a way of welcoming everybody and getting started. So let me do that. Okay. I wanted to start by anchoring us in where we've come from. So we started together the week of April 13th, just as the world was beginning to change with COVID. And now, kind of miraculously, at least it feels to me, it's the week of June 8th, and the world is even more different than when we started. So I want to acknowledge and just appreciate each of you for your commitment in being with us for the last several months. I know that it takes intention on each of our parts, on each of your parts, to be available and committed for our full group workshops as well as for your buddies. So just want to start by saying thank you for that. I also feel like as a group, we've really lived into our commitments to each other that we said at the beginning of the workshop in terms of being present, open-hearted, willing to learn, showing up with curiosity, being present and prepared. So I want to acknowledge us and thank each of you for that as well as we welcome you to our final wrap-up session. So with that, our council prompt for today is what's on your heart and mind as we gather for our final session. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you. Who would like to start?
I can go.
Cody?
On my heart is just really happy to be able to meet this group of people and be able to learn together and push each other in our thoughts. And on my mind, I'm really going to miss this. I look forward to working with this group. And I love learning, so this is right up my alley. And I'm really happy to be here and to have the chance to meet you all. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Cody. Welcome. Who's next?
I'll go. I just want to say ditto what Cody said. That was like perfectly expressed.
Great. Thanks, Claudette. Welcome. Glad you're here. Sarah or Suzanne? Suzanne?
Yeah, so I guess also Cody and Claudette, what they said, and I hope that this continues in some iteration, like either it's, via email, you kind of think about buddies. So I guess I'm coming with like hope that maybe some aspects of this continue, definitely like what we've learned, but hopefully some of the camaraderie as well. So
great. Thanks, Suzanne.
Comes together.
Yeah. Thanks. Sarah. Oops, you're on mute, Sarah.
There we go. Sorry. I'm outside, so there's lots of traffic noise. So I'm trying to make sure it's not too loud for you guys. Yeah, I think same. I do. It's bittersweet. Was the first thing that came to my mind. It's I'm glad to have been through this process, and I feel enriched by it. But I'm a little bit bummed to be leaving you guys. Not so bummed about not having homework. I'm gonna be honest. But
okay.
After that, yeah, this has been great.
Good. Thanks, Sarah. Welcome. I'm glad you're sitting outside too. Good. It's good. Joanne, you want to check in?
Yeah, I'm shocked that we're at the last session, and just looking at this calendar, I can't believe it's been all this time. So I too am surprised that we're here at 2 days. And what is on my heart and mind are a couple of things. What's on my heart is I'm really looking forward to furthering the work with each of you in small and large ways as we leave this space. And also, what's been on my heart and mind a lot is with everything going on in the world, how we can take these tools and these approaches and these awarenesses to help contribute to healing a broken and fractured world. And so I'm I'm sitting with that a little heavily in my heart, but I am emboldened by the fact that we have increased our numbers of change agents that are out there doing the work. So we absolutely will stay connected, and I can't wait to see what kind of stuff we can get ourselves into. So that's where I'm at.
Great, thanks, Joanne. And I'll check in by saying that what's on my heart and mind are really two things. On my heart is a lot of gratitude. I have totally enjoyed getting to know Claudette, Sarah, and Suzanne, the three of you. And I've really loved, Cody, you being able to be a part of this process and the six of us coming together. So I have a lot of gratitude for the experience. And what I'm really curious about for today is I can't wait to do the recap of the elements and to hear for each of you what were your most salient takeaways, because I'm confident that Joanne and I are going to learn in that process as well. So I'm looking forward to that. So with that, welcome to me, welcome to all of us. Let us review our meeting plan. And if there is a volunteer who would please read today's context for the, oh, I did that again, final workshop. It says solve, but it should say context for today's final workshop.
I can go.
Thanks, Claudette.
We made it. Today's the final session in our Lead and Achieve Complex Change Spring 2020 cohort. It's been a delight to have this group of passionate, talented women together. Today, we'll recap some of our key learning in our new leadership playbook. We'll also introduce several pieces of content that are an important part of our toolkit for creating sustainable, strategic, and impactful change. We want to leave feeling confident and ready. At this time, our world needs more community, collaboration, and inclusion. It needs our change leadership.
Woohoo! Thanks, Claudette. Is there anybody who'd be willing to read our intent for the workshop experience, our intent for today, and our intended outcomes, please?
I can do that. So intent for the workshop experience to build kick-ass skills to lead and achieve complex change. Intent for today to feel complete with this experience and emboldened to navigate complex change. And then intended outcomes, number one, insights into what we've learned by mapping our respective stakeholder networks. 2, shared understanding of key insights and learning for each element: lead, meet, solve, and involve. 3, shared understanding of the primary types of decision-making methods, as well as why it aids collaboration to separate process from content when making decisions. 4, an early understanding of and willingness to enroll others in this way of leading and working. 5, to have increased awareness of our worldviews and how it impacts how we lead and create change. 6, increased belief in our own growing ability to lead and achieve complex change. 7, a feeling of gratitude from and for your buddy. And 8, a feeling of connection, community, and closure amongst this cohort.
Awesome, thank you. Any thoughts or questions or upgrades on our intent and intended outcomes? Okay, I'm going to, because we've made some changes, I'll do the walkthrough of the what, the when, and the what columns, just to, because I made some changes about 45 minutes ago to our sequence. So as soon as we're finished aligning on the meeting plan, Joanne's going to facilitate a 20-minute segment looking at your stakeholder network, so your homework from your buddy meetings. And then we're going to move into an hour of recapping the elements, which will be largely an opportunity for you to reflect and share with each other, and then for us to reflect and share as a large group. And then from there, we're going to take 5 minutes, and this is a piece that I moved further up in the agenda. Suzanne does have a hard stop at 3:20 to 3:25 Eastern time, so she'll need to leave early. So I wanted to make sure that Suzanne and Cody, you have a chance as buddies to connect, and Sarah and Claudette. So we'll do 5 minutes of buddy gratitude, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back and we'll do 20 minutes on decision making, which Suzanne, I'm really glad that you'll still be here, so you'll get that piece of the conversation. Then we're going to move into 15 minutes on enrolling others, which is a lot of the questions, or several of the questions that we that you had asked in our request for what you might like to talk about today really had to do with how do you begin to enroll others in leading and working this way. So we'll have a piece of content and a conversation around that. Joanne will then facilitate 20 minutes on a win-win worldview, which is a way of bringing all of this into a larger context for how we think about ourselves in the world. We'll spend 5 minutes on next steps, and then we'll check out at 1:50, ending promptly at 2 o'clock Mountain Time or 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Sound good? Okay, all right. So with that, Joanne, it's up to you. Over to you.
Thank you. It's just setting up our breakout rooms. All right, so now we're at the 11:15 item. We've got 20 minutes for this section. We're a little bit ahead. And essentially, the process is this. We're going to start with each buddy pair, and you guys get to do a little show and tell as to the stakeholder networks that you've created. So I don't exactly know how we're going to do that. Hopefully somebody has a clever plan for how they want to show their work. Maybe they can share their screen or something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So, and then before we switch, we'll just do a real quick, we'll just do 1 and 2 for each buddy pair and then switch. And so I'll sort of keep an eye on the clock, about 10 minutes per buddy pair for the next 20 minutes. So, which buddy pair would like to volunteer to go first? I see Suzanne and Cody smiling, so I'm gonna.
I know.
Suzanne and Cody, take yourselves off mute. How do you wanna show us? I think you can just go ahead and just
share screen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wants to go?
Suzanne, do you want to go first, or I can go first? Doesn't matter.
So I've got mine open like a Google tab, so hopefully that will suffice for our little exercise here. So we're just sharing sort of a screenshot of this, right?
Yeah.
Let's get this blown up a little bit so it's readable. Is that beyond? Okay. I'm sorry, I'm toggling between the screens. All right, here we go. Share. This is the screen I want to share. Okay, so y'all can see that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So we spent a lot of our buddy call. Cody was really gracious and spent a lot of the buddy call helping me kind of walk through what now seems like a very resonant scope statement that that I was working on. And so just as a reminder, my problem statement was for our organization to have a culture that allows for bodies of culture and a diversity of backgrounds to thrive and develop professionally. And so we kind of walked through, it seems like I had a really hard time, to be honest, like just isolating on the internal work, because it seems like there's just so much work that we need to do as an organization. So Cody was really helpful in kind of really helping me isolate like what was internal and what kind of blurred the line into external work. So do you want me to just kind of like walk through this? Like what's the most dynamic way of presenting this? Like
probably if you have the map, can you just point to the map?
Oh, the map.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Okay, hold on a second. I might not have the map actually. Hold on a second. Let me.
Suzanne, will you look for that? I can at least share mine in that way.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Okay, I'm gonna be looking over here. Is this big enough for everybody to kind of see?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I did mine a little bit differently. My map, my first outcome of my problem statement was to create a stakeholder map. And I felt in this time like I needed to be able to visually see this. And so that's what I did. So, and the things that I was running into with this process, and I could see why this is different. This is different than what an actual stakeholder map would be. Because when I thought about our core team, I don't know if Blue Sky, like the core team I knew was like me and Shannon and the students, but then I also felt like my dean and then a new colleague that I'm going to be working with might be in the core team. It was a little, I feel like if I was focusing on a problem like this summit and did this for the full actual summit, then it would make more sense than using this to do a stakeholder map. So what I tried to do was indicate, you know, we've got the Blue Sky leadership team, which my boss, Tim Dunnigan, is kind of the conduit and the liaison to that, kind of. I wouldn't say that his role is very clear of what the request is, but if things were perfect, that's how it would be. And then everyone who's in there. I had Shannon as our liaison for the executive committee, and then I put as like an input feedback one, as we have 4 executive committees meetings a year. So I figured that was like the way to show it. This section's entirely new, so I don't actually know who's on these. It's just from what I could find in their documents, but I know that they're, you know, wanting to do a monthly newsletter, so trying to show that. While Suzanne and I were in our buddy call, and is this the time for questions, or should we wait until everybody shows?
No, actually, go ahead and questions, comments, just because this is sort of like your final capstone presentation.
Mm-hmm. So what we were running into is that, you know, when you orient yourself or anchor yourself into the intended outcomes, and then from that, you're trying to think of, okay, what sub-teams do we need to have to be able to get to those intended outcomes? I feel like it was difficult to put in the input and feedback event and the community and outreach event without actually writing out each sub-team's like clear roles and responsibilities. Like, what are their deliverables? So that was something that Suzanne and I talked about, and wondering if, I know that this is just a visual and you should probably have another document that clearly states, you know, we're expecting monthly newsletters, we're expecting, you know, clear communication strategy plan, and that accompanies this map, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And you could also, Cody, like if you have a team that's responsible for communications and they have all kinds of deliverables that come out of there, you could show them, you could show comms as a sub-team, and you wouldn't necessarily show all of their deliverables as communication events unless they were significant enough that they are sort of map worthy based on the size of your change initiative.
So then a follow-up question to that, so I have like biannual meetings with this leadership team, but there's still like touch points with them throughout the year. We're just not in person. Would you put that as like these little pink or purple guys? Like, do you put that as like, we know we need to have a communication to this team and like an amount, or is it like a visual, we know we need to communicate this to this team, and then internally you say how often, what, when?
I think for me, it depends. Like in that example, I would not map all of the little touch points with the Blue Sky leadership team. What's illustrative, I think, about this is that it's clarified for you that it's not clear that Tim is the liaison.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's been challenging in terms of your daily work and interface with that team. So part of the value of the map is it helps you to see what's missing, or what if something is more clear, will make work easier, right? And it increases your likelihood of smooth change.
Yeah.
The other thing that I see on here just quickly is like Blue Sky actually operates as you actually have 3, up until this point, you've had 3 little core teams, right? Like you and then you're the hub in the middle. So that's not how, I mean, we wouldn't advocate, I don't think setting it up that way, but if you were to draw reality, that's what this would look like.
Yeah, and that's something I struggled with also, because in the core, I almost just put my own name.
Mhm.
So I was like, but, and then how, and maybe these are some of the questions that came up for the other ladies, but in the core team, like, do you only, like, you want doers? And I feel like with a lot of the ones that I work with, they're not doers. They're power positions, but not doers. So then how do you get people to be on your core team who necessarily might not have the time, commitment to have this change management happen?
Well, I think sorry, my answer is always it depends, I think. So in your case, I think illustrating the stakeholders of the Institute and how you work together is actually quite illustrative. Like, had you just put yourself in the middle, like that is exactly the conversation that you had with Tim on Monday, which is like, this is more than one person can do, right?
Yeah.
So it helps to make that point. On the topic of enrolling other people, in the way that I've approached that in organizations is reaching some sort of formal agreement with them or whoever they work for about the level of time and commitment that it's going to take to be a part of the change effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a little more, it's more formal than volunteering, right? You're actually trying to make an agreement about commitment of time.
Okay. That's really helpful, because I'm going to have to start doing that. So thank you.
So the other thing, just real quickly, in terms of a couple of touch points before we move back to Suzanne. One, the clarification of the role of liaison is really key, and to make that explicit. And the reason why you want to do that is because a lot of times folks like Tim, they forget that they're not aware that they're actually performing a role as a liaison representing a group's interests. A lot of times people sit on the committee and they think they're just representing their own interests, right? So that's really helpful. And what you just illustrated is you got a bunch of PE stakeholders sitting in this quote unquote core team, but they're not actually performing the function of the core team. And so it actually is helpful to reimagine them. Maybe they're actually an input feedback event, right? But you actually need to reconfigure your core team that has specific roles and responsibilities. So what a process like this, not necessarily the map, but the process like this allows you to think through some of the frustrations and potential bottlenecks and potential blind spots that you have had prior to being able to think about it this way. Is that helpful?
So then, yeah, that is helpful. And I feel like I know the next step is to then have the conversation of, here's the role I would need you to play. Are you comfortable with that? Like, that's the part where I get nervous and scared to say, Tim, I need you, like you said, I need you to play this role. Or this is my assumption that you're playing, but I'm not actually sure if it's being communicated to everybody else.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I think we do need to move on. Shannon and I are going to be prototyping a work product for SIA that I think is going to address some of these things, which is essentially a project's kickoff starter kit, which is like, how do you actually kick off a project and have delineated clarity of roles and responsibilities and make that part of the way you onboard anything. And so I have a feeling that once we prototype it for SIA, we're going to probably end up sharing it with you to use at Blue Sky.
Great, thank you, and sorry for taking time.
Very good. That was helpful.
Dan, are you ready to show us what you got?
Yeah, so I mean, in full disclosure here, I don't know, I guess I didn't correctly save or pull down like my map. And to be completely honest, it wasn't completed. So I had a core team and I got to like my subgroups and then I was thinking through the events. So do you want me to walk through that? Like, what's the best way to?
Actually, why don't we just ask you the takeaway question, which is like, having gone through that exercise, what were the key insights that you had? Because like Cody ended up with a whole bunch of like ahas and questions, and so where was sort of your mind at the end of this exercise?
Something that came up for us yesterday is our management structure is really flat, and so I think I too struggled with sort of like the doing piece, and then also at the same time for our core team, like delegating, responsibilities so that it was equal. And then my other issue was we're just all so siloed, and we all hold a lot of power. So there's also this dynamic of, I think, going back to expectations and roles, like relinquishment of power, of like, I have this program and I manage that, like if we want to come together and create more of a process and solve some of these problems, there's got to be this relinquishing of power. And how do you, like, I was just thinking, oh, how am I going to navigate this? So we're doing it all in tandem, and then also equally contributing.
Well, I hope that's something you and I are going to be able to work on coming out of this. All right.
Can I say one thing about that, Joanne?
Yeah, please.
I think the essence of that conversation, Suzanne, is when you bring your stakeholders together around the context of your intent statement, it is to ask the question, given our organizational roles and responsibilities and the work that we know that is a part of this intent, what's the most appropriate role for each of us to play? Right? What's the work we should own, right? Because some people have the skill, some people don't, but you have to be able to think about your organizational hat, this work, and where do those two things come together in the context of the work and the team, and then get that on paper.
That's very helpful.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah.
All right. Unfortunately, we're going to have to switch over to Claudette and Sarah. Who wants to present first? All right, Claudette.
Yeah, I can go first.
You want to share a screen?
Okay, yeah, let me find it. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so my problem statement, well, I've been thinking about this for a while since we started getting questions and concerns about utility moratoria, shutoffs, and moratoria on late payments. And so we've gotten loads and loads of information, and we need a way of organizing it and getting the information out to our stakeholders so that it better serves them. So from that, my problem statement was, how do we convene and brainstorm solutions to COVID-19 in a COVID-19 environment? And what is the best way to get information to the stakeholders that are requesting it? So, for example, we're all working virtually. Normally we might have some workshop or something where everybody convenes together, but we're working virtually. So we have to figure that out, navigate that too. So my intent is stakeholders get access to the COVID-19 EE program information that they're looking for. Intended outcomes would be provide a forum for an exchange of ideas, identify stakeholders, program implementers gain a clearer path moving forward, and determine the best pathway for input and communication. So our core team is basically the policy team. There's 3 of us, myself, Cyrus, and Emmy. Then I talked with another team member, Will. He voiced some concerns also with a pilot that we see has been working on that's not necessarily directly related to utilities, but they're a program implementer. Sarah for our communications piece, and then I believe we need a utility representative as a liaison, but I don't know who that would be yet.
Why don't you just skip to your map?
Okay, so so we have the core policy team. This is policy team. I'm Cyrus, myself. So I guess with the purple is communication. So are we communicating through? We have to communicate internally to the strategy team and delivery team, and then with the delivery team, then we communicate somehow with our website or through social media. And then we also communicate through webinars. We get input and output from webinars. We get input from the program implementers. I have them as, all lumped together right now. And basically Cyrus is hosting all of those groups, low income working group, policy committee, and then RIOs, those are the other energy efficiency organizations. So this, I really went back and forth, defining the teams and creating the map. So that was one of the things, takeaways that I had that I was going to explain in our breakout session. But, as I saw the map, it created, I had nothing, everything was blank on these other teams and stuff. And then now I have like 3 pages after I created the map. And there's still, I still have a lot of questions about, who's going to be our utility representative, and is one person enough hosting, if Cyrus is hosting all of those teams, is one person enough? And then Emmy is really good at collecting data and organizing the data. So she takes more, she was taking more of a periphery role, and I think that it would be good to define her role, in the grand scheme of all of this. And I think this would help.
Cool. So the central insight once you drew the map was that you were missing a whole bunch of other things that you were able to go back, and so eventually it'll loop back and end up on this map.
Yeah, I added things, I rearranged circles or ovals, whatever these are, and egg shapes, and just, it looks totally different than when I started.
Oh, cool. So I have a question though. So if the intent is for stakeholders to get access to the EE program information, where is that? So all these purple, so they're all communication events, but where's the ultimate communication events of that? Is it those webinars? Or where?
That is not defined yet.
Not yet. Oh, you haven't. Okay.
Like at the moment, we have 3 avenues. We have the webinars, we have our website, and we have social media. That we have those 3 at the moment.
All right. And so what this does,
and also the groups, like, when we convene with the low income working group, the LIWG, we can communicate the information there.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's the reason why this is so purple heavy, because there's a lot of information getting pushed out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Shan, any questions or comments from you about this?
Nothing other than to just acknowledge you, Claudette, for your, am I on mute? No, just for your thinking, right? In terms of really being thorough of working through the intent and intended outcomes, and being willing to grapple with what does that mean for your stakeholders. And I can see you really digging into the process. So I want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, cool. And you guys are really sort of living into that whole iteration, like how it's iterative, and it's great. Any, so we have about a minute left. Well, we don't have any time left, but I do want to just sort of throw the mic open to anybody who had a lingering question on anybody else's or comment about anybody else's project, because you heard Shannon and I do a lot of talking.
Sarah, anything you want to say about your insights as you did your map?
Sure. I mean, mine is a little bit different. It's not centered around any specific event because it's kind of like I'm building a PR strategy for the organization. So there's not a specific, like, at the moment, because we haven't built the strategy or plan yet, there's no event associated with it. But other than that, I don't know, it was good. It was good to put it all down and kind of map out where everybody lies and think through who needs to be involved in the process, especially when it comes to like roles and responsibilities and who's the decision maker and who is not, kind of clearly outlining that from the get-go so we don't get ourselves into a mess.
Did we see your map?
No.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Like all in SIA, and I forgot that. Can you show your map real quickly?
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't mean it.
No, that's okay. Hold on. All right, there it is.
Woo, cool.
So, yeah, there's a lot of people. We like to put everybody on all the teams. So that's what we have. So in the core is essentially like most of our strategic team minus like one person basically. And I don't even know, honestly, if like this, like Ashley and the board would necessarily even be on this team. Like this might be off to the side because I don't know how much, she's my boss. That's the only reason why she's on there at the moment. But I think she is not going to have a lot of like direct, you know, decision making when it comes to this strategy. But we've got our delivery team, which is the team through which all communications kind of flow. So when people have content that's ready to distribute, it goes through delivery team. We decide the best way to do it. We brainstorm ways to approach problems like what Claudette wants to do. So a lot of people are on that team. And then from there, like basically through me, because I am the comms person, I then disseminate information to stakeholders, members, media, like, and that is kind of a wide swath for the moment because there's not a specific plan in place yet. Sorry, everybody decided to drive up and down the street like right when I started talking. Over here, I do have comms for funders under Wesley, just because he is the person that directly communicates with them. I don't do a lot of stuff with them. I might help him on a few things, but he is their primary liaison. So funders belongs to him. He leads the strategy team, and he also is the official rep on the core and strategy teams for our built environment group. They don't have their own director right now. And then down here we have other work groups. This is our policy team with Claudette and Emmy and Cyrus, and then our transportation team, which is Anne and an intern. Ashley would be our liaison to the board. So if there's anything we want to communicate to the board, like regarding the plan at an upcoming meeting or to let them know about something that's coming up, she would be the one to reach out to them in that regard. So that's kind of the you know, whatever, 30,000 foot view of the core team. Wesley and I are the primary people working on this and presenting it to people.
Right. What was your key insight or awareness that you developed as a result of having done this?
I think the best thing for me was really just think about where information gets pushed out and to whom, like thinking through like these are the three main kind of groups that are going to be getting information from via the delivery team, and kind of all the input that's going to go into that and how to manage that process. Wesley's over here doing funders, and to think too through like, what do we really want? Like what contributions, what role should the core team, like not the core team, but our working groups play into this process, like in terms of decision making or knowledge input, like that kind of stuff. Was really helpful, so that I tend to want to ask everybody their opinion and then not necessarily, I've been, I don't know, I guess probably shy about being really authoritative about what I think SIA should do just because it's a new industry to me. Like I didn't come from an energy organization before I came to SIA, but I think with something like this, I need to probably be a little more authoritative and directive, which is not super comfortable for me, but probably better.
Yeah. I have a question, and that has to do with the redundancy of names, and you guys are wearing multiple hats. And so
Yes.
we didn't really touch too much on roles and responsibilities, but we did talk a little bit about that. I'm just kind of curious, are the people that are sort of redundantly appearing, like I'm looking at the delivery team and the strategy team,
Mm-hmm.
are they aware that when they're sitting in the strategy team that they're fundamentally wearing a different hat than the delivery team, or do those lanes get kind of crossed sometimes?
I think they totally get crossed all the time. And I think that, I mean, like I consider Anne and Cyrus on the core team, and I think they play a different role there than they would here on strategy team, or even in delivery team.
Right.
Because I think there's information that I need from them about their work areas that's important to building this PR strategy, that it's not going to be the same as like what I would ask them as a member of the strategy team.
And if there was a little bit more delineation of roles and responsibilities as per these functional groups, that it would actually help things a lot.
I totally think so. And that's definitely something, you know, I know that you guys know a bit about this, but something we've grappled with a lot in terms of like building out strategy through like these two most immediate like crises when it comes to the COVID response, when it comes to all of the racial injustice response. Like, what is the function of delivery team? What is the function of strategy team? What is, you know, my function as a gatekeeper for external communications? What is your function as leading a work group in deciding what content you put out and stuff like that? Like that is all real. Yeah, it's all mishmashy.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Shannon, any questions or observations from you?
Oh, sorry.
No, I think even having the map and maybe using the map to anchor the conversations you have, Sarah, and reminding people when, Cyrus, I'm coming to you and I want you to be in this circle, right? I'm coming to you in your strategy circle, or I'm coming to you in your delivery circle, and just helping them to know what hat you need them to wear and which conversation could be valuable. And the map helps them see themselves and all the different relationships that they play.
Yeah, I mean, I think even doing something like this, like in general for the organization, would be very interesting, because there are, like, even as you saw on Claudette's map, there's like several external groups that we manage and provide input and feedback. So this could get a lot more complicated.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
I had a question.
Yeah.
That's okay, just because Sarah's map kind of brought up something from our work session, and kind of suffer from the same thing with like the same people being on different teams. And Cody was pushing me to like kind of refine that a little bit more, which I appreciated. And I'm just wondering, like, is that the advice? I mean, y'all are giving advice about like the switching the hats. Is there more that we could be potentially doing for small organizations? Like I'm assuming like SIA and also for Georgia Organics, where we can be, I don't know, not duplicating as many of the same people.
Yeah. Shan, do you want to expand on that? I think you started that.
Well, yeah, I may not be thinking what you think I'm thinking. I don't know, Joanne. I would push Suzanne to the extent that you can for clarity. And then really, I think it starts to highlight where you have resource gaps.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some organizations, it's a luxury to be able to have different people playing different roles. So if you can, that's fantastic. If you can't, then to me, the next best option is helping people learn to be clear about what swim lane they're in which in part of the work and conversation. And I think that takes time and it takes intentionality.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was expecting you to, I was hoping you'd say.
Okay.
You know, because you're used to dealing with such larger organizations, and so, but having these clear roles and responsibilities is really important. I think the other thing about the smaller organizations that we suffer from, as opposed to larger organizations, is that there's a lot of this is personality driven, right? So it's this person who has all this contextual knowledge, and things do get really messy. And so when you start thinking about these things as functional work units, you begin to create the opportunity to have different conversations. But I think you're going to come up against some culture stuff. And so you do want to enter in these conversations benevolently, you know, in the spirit of serving, as opposed to, you know, somebody was talking about eroding somebody's power. I think, Suzanne, you were talking about that, right?
Yeah.
It's not about eroding somebody's personality power, their ability to get things done, but it's actually in service of the intent. And that's why having the intent and having the intended outcomes is so critical at the beginning of this exercise, because it's not about marginalizing any one person or a voice, but it's all about how do we forward the work together. Mm-hmm. So, but it's a big, right? Again, like everything we've done, it's like the tip of the iceberg, and then once you start digging, you're like, oh, it can get very complicated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
All right, folks. It is 1:15. Anybody have any final things that they need to say before we move on? I think we're going to be able to make up some time. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next thing. So thank you very much, and that puts a pause on the involve component of the curriculum. So now we're going to come back full circle, and I'm going to go into this next section in which I'm going to do just a little bit of presenting, just to do a little table setting, clear our heads from all of our involved stuff. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do this awesome exercise, and Shannon and I are going to do this with you. So we haven't gotten too much farther ahead than you, which is this idea out of each element to share your top 2 or 3 most impactful learnings and takeaways from each element. So each of you will have, you'll get into your groups, and you'll have about, maybe not the full 15, maybe about 12 minutes or so to do this exercise. And then we're going to come back together. I'm going to stitch together things that we've learned and create sort of a coherent collective reflection. And then we'll do some final question and answers. And I think this is probably so we'll just see how we'll go, but I'll just try to keep an eye on the time, because I know we have kind of a hard, firm stop at 12:35 to switch over. Any questions about that process before we begin? I can't see you, so you have to say something. All right, in that case, yes?
We're good.
We're good, awesome. All right, in that case, we're gonna do a quick recap. Next slide. I want to re-presence this slide that we talked about on the very, very first day. And I want us to just sort of read it over to ourselves, because I'm hoping that these words, I'm hoping that what you can see is they're not just words on a paper, right? That everything that's on this values page about demonstrating ways to have people work together at the highest level of integrity, meaning that we have competencies, right? So all of you now have competencies and awarenesses and knowledge that you didn't have before. And so it contributes to a higher level of group integrity. And I think one of the things that we've demonstrated time and time again is that the room is much wiser than any one person. And, all of us with our different journeys having gotten here, to be able to have the skills to demonstrate that we can actually create the best change by working together. So I just want us to, because Shannon and I go back to this all the time, and this is everything that we live and die by is on this slide. And I hope that you have sort of adopted some of that yourself. Let's go to the next slide. This is another slide that we talk about. So we've talked a lot about self-other system, and I think now that you've gone through this, you're much more nimble, and we'll continue to practice. This is something that takes just constant practice, the ability to differentiate the different levels of self, others, the system, and for so many of our problems, the world, but that we always begin with self. And so I encourage you all as you leave here to come back to that, what I can't do for others, but I cannot do for others what I have not done for myself. So that whole leadership lens of beginning with self and self-mastery, self-awareness is key. Next slide. Another thing that was foundational to everything that we have talked about is this integration of not just cognitive knowledge or clarity, but a combination of heart-centered, human-centered, interdependency, collaborative perspective taking, empathy, all that stuff in combination with actual sustainable action. So that this sort of head, heart, hand integration has also been a theme that we have woven throughout our time together. Next slide. And so we put them all together. And the idea, and being able to toggle back and forth between head, heart, and hand and self-other system is just, it's a practice that we encourage you to just practice all the time. Am I engaging my head? Am I engaging my heart? Am I thinking about self, other, system, right? So the more nimble you can get to maneuver among these different fields, the greater your capacity is to understand and engage and create sustainable change. Next slide. So we take all of our fundamentals and we divide them into these 4 interrelated units. I'm not going to read over this slide. This slide summarizes some of what we consider to be the essential takeaways. What we're really interested in is actually what's going to happen next in this exercise, which is what are your actual takeaways. So these are some of the content areas that we've covered. And so you'll have this forever. So you can take a look at this later on. But we wanted to provide a little bit of the summary of the different things just to remind us as we have progressed over the last couple of months. Before I leave this slide, does anyone have any questions or comments about the different elements? This was not meant to be comprehensive. It was really meant to be just sort of a high-level overview. And since I can't see you, if you don't peep, I'm not gonna. All right.
Looks like no questions, Jason.
All right, excellent. And next slide.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, so that's my quick overview. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put you guys into your groups. I'm going to give you about, I'm going to do 12 plus 1. So it'll put 12 minutes on the clock, and then they'll give you an extra minute. So 13 minutes total to get with your buddy. And the idea is to share 2 or 3 impactful learnings, and then probably distill for each buddy, distill it to 2 or 3, like if you brought 4, maybe choose a couple. The idea is to kind of come up with a composite of the 2 of you, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put it together in a more meta document. Any questions about that? There's no wrong or right way to do it, but just talk and come up with something. Any questions or comments before I put you in your groups? All right, I'll see you back in 13 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry about not having the sharing permissions, but I think
Shit.
it's all good now. Let me actually, I'm gonna double check.
Were you guys able to edit your documents?
Now they are. When you went to go pee, I was.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't double check that.
It's all good. Now I change the sharing permissions on the collective. Okay. All right, Claudette went to go pee as well. And oh, she was back. She's disappeared altogether. All right. Let's go ahead and here she is. All right, let's go ahead and report out by element. And while you guys report out, I'm just gonna, Shannon, are you gonna go ahead and copy and paste while people are reporting out into the group, and then we'll do a big reveal at the end?
Sure. And just so I can do that efficiently, are you gonna go element by element across groups, JC? Okay.
Element by element across groups.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So let's go ahead and have group 1 and group 2 open. Let's start with group 1. And what were your reflections on lead?
Or I think I'm not muted, right? Okay.
You are not muted.
So I have Claudette and I discussed identifying and breaking down sort of the trust within self and others, being more reliable, setting a schedule and sticking to it so we can build that accountability, asking more questions and being more curious, making sure for, one of the big takeaways is the benevolence and making sure it's centered and not passing over it, and sort of like the speed of the day-to-day.
Good, great. Group 2. That's what you had.
So we talked about being able to recognize when trust was broken, and then where you can pinpoint how to fix it, having that skill. And then Sarah brought up it's just a really mindfulness approach, being able to kind of take yourself back from what's going on, and we can take the emotion out of it so that you're making a more clear decision. The analogy that she was using was, it's like you're seeing all the traffic go by and, you know, of your life and your work life, and you're kind of sitting on the overpass, being able to see how it's all interacting together and deciding that way.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. The not taking it personally. Group 3, I'll report out for group 3 since Shannon is copying and pasting. We had some similar reflections as well. We have 3. The first one is just knowing the difference between the 3 dimensions makes creating and building trust a lot easier. And the corollary to that is knowing which dimension is most broken helps making building and rebuilding trust easier. And like some of you said, benevolence is essential, and that it must be felt from you by the person or the thing that you are trying to change. And one of the things I asked Shannon was, what do you mean benevolence towards the thing? And she said, well, sometimes the thing is the culture or the organization, or, you know, something that's abstract, something that is the aggregation. And so she was talking about how her mind shift of being benevolent to the organizational culture, as opposed to being in opposition to it, was the foundational shift that she had to make in order to help change it. So those were our 3. And actually you can join us on the composite if you want to, just to sort of take a look. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that before we move on to the next thing? All right, let's go back to group 1 and do the same thing with Meet. What were your takeaways from Meet, group 1?
So for Meet, we had committing to and leveraging the pre-work for meetings, learning to pivot during the meetings, and being comfortable with reading the room and responding to that. Separating out subject matter experts and facilitator roles, or sort of like that idea of switching hats when you have in that place where you're serving multiple roles.
Fantastic. Group 2.
We talked about just having those intended outcomes. I know that SIA uses this as a guiding principle, but at Boise State, they do not. I'm now sharing with Sarah that a lot of times you go into meetings that even the host of the meeting doesn't know why we're all there, which is really frustrating. So being able to have those clearly defined. And then Sarah actually emboldened me to define the roles of people in the meetings that I have, because sometimes I feel like I love the roles that Strelo's created and the definitions associated with them. And just being able to say, as a participant, it is your responsibility to help us get to this intended outcome and that clarity. I didn't know how to go about that, and Sarah's like, dude, go for it. Anytime we start a new project, you know, it is, here's this scope in our team, and here's your specific role, and just the clarity around it, and don't be scared to do it, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And then Sarah's last reflection was around this: the meeting tool helps with laziness and being intentional. And it's honestly, like, when I think about it, it's a respect of other people's time. If you go through this to say, like, this is what I need from your time, and it won't be a waste. So
awesome, thank you. May I offer a suggestion in upgrading language? There's no room for shaming and blaming ourselves in any of this. So I might suggest that we replace avoid laziness with help shift our priorities. Because I don't think it's about laziness. I think it's about exhaustion. It's about priorities. So as we are trying to uplift each other, we want to avoid any sort of shamey, blamey language.
Thank you, Jillian.
You're welcome. All right, group 3. We said that meetings are a prime opportunity for leaders to model and embody head, heart, and hand. That they are really the most visible areas of we can display true leadership. And I think that's a really profound takeaway. I think some of you echoed this. Sufficient structure can create the foundation or create the conditions, actually is probably what I should say. Create the conditions to really help us do our real and best real-time working and thinking together. Every meaningful encounter can be considered a meeting, right? So that I like that one as a takeaway. And then one of our favorites is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions or comments about our takeaways from me? This is kind of fun. I like this. All right, moving on. Solve, group 1.
Yeah, so we had, and I, Claudette, I'm sorry, I've typed these in, and so I'm just rambling these off if that's okay. So we said the interview style in that particular session or workshop was very effective, and even if you're having to use it on yourself, you should. Coming with an intended outcome, even in an informal setting. Solidifying project statement really is the pre-work for developing the project and the programmatic work that we're often tasked with, and that it helps us define our actual processes.
Okay, thank you. Group 2.
All right, I can take this one for us. So we felt like in the solve section, the ability to get to the root of the problem and not just focus on sort of like a surface or self level really helped us. Oh, sorry, hold on. I'm trying to close something and it's wanting me to leave the meeting. Ooh, got distracted. Now I've like lost my total train of thought. But if we look at having the self-other system in order to solve problems is super helpful, because if you can define the problem well on the outset, you're more than halfway to figuring out what the solution is. And when people approach a situation with solutions already in hand, it just, it very rarely actually solves the problem. So as addressing, I know that we've used this metaphor at SIA a lot, the sort of like leaves and trees and then the trunk of the tree and the roots. And we talked about it a little bit in here. That if you're just chopping off all the leaves and the branches, you're not getting to like the meat of the problem. And that is kind of how we look at solving, not actually articulating the problem before trying to define the solution for that problem. There you go.
Cool. There's more.
There's more. Oh, I do have more. Look at that. Oh, yeah. And the self-other system, to me, self-other system is like the 2.0 of the tree analogy, because it helps you to kind of see everything from everybody's perspective. The leaves, or trying to decide that immediate like surface solution, to me is like leaves and more focused on the self. And the more you get to see the whole thing comprehensively, the more you can get to the trunk of the tree, and then you can't solve systems on your own, obviously, but you can try and you can get closer.
Great, thanks. Did you cover all of them? That's a lot.
I think so. I think I got all of it.
Right.
Did I get all of it, Cody? Okay.
All right, group 3, solve. So we said some similar things, that perspective taking is really essential. When we can see the situation from someone else's point of view, we begin to create the conditions for progress and change. We are all the blind people trying to see the elephant. That's our first takeaway. Similar to what you guys explored, once we've identified the true problem we're trying to solve, it can result in a profound mind shift and can be truly energizing. Number 3, just knowing that there are 5 fields of a problem-solving landscape can really help disentangle what we're really trying to do. Those are the 3 things. Any questions about solve? Okay. Let's see. Last but not least, involve group 1.
You want me to do, I can do the last one since.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm sorry too for not.
Oh no, it was perfect. Everything was fine. So we have it was an iterative process of drafting and redrafting intended outcomes and stakeholder map. It's good for intention setting. I'll come back to operationalize. Help clarify roles for small groups. Don't be afraid to change the map and the outcomes with that iterative process. Setting aside time. It takes time to create these back events will be evolving during COVID, and so the stakeholder map will evolve too. So in everything I do, I take into consideration the fact that we're working virtually and we're not under normal business as usual. Suzanne, do you want to talk about operationalize? I don't remember what we discussed.
Yeah, I guess for me, it was really helpful in thinking through some of like, I guess the previous, the solve state, you know, like going from scope to the involve sections was really helpful to think about, like, you know, I guess it ties everything together so that I'm going through, we're setting expectations, we're asking people, we're enrolling them, and being more specific about the change that we're seeking. And it just seemed like it was the culmination of all the other workshops that we've had together. And so it felt like it was, yeah, I guess putting wheels on the road, so to speak.
Cool, thank you. I want to just point out this last thing that Claudette said about the stakeholder map evolving. I don't think we really place too much emphasis on this, but I think it's a really important takeaway that the map is really supposed to be the living, breathing. It's supposed to like grow and shift and change and morph as the project goes on. So the fact that you guys actually identified that, I think, is really crucial. Let's see, group 3. What did group 3 say?
We need to do group 2 first.
Oh, I'm sorry, group 2. Group 2.
Okay, yeah, this was again like a good opportunity for us to gain perspective, reflect on the needs and wants of other stakeholders, and kind of in that same idea, figuring out what people can contribute versus what they're willing to contribute. And I know this is Cody's question about, do you recommend going through that exercise and distinguishing between the two with your stakeholders? And then providing clarity on the roles when you're on each team. For me, the visual of just seeing everybody on one page and seeing where people are on multiple teams, the how they are overcommitted or undercommitted, or what roles they play, what hat they wear in each of those positions, is really good because it gives you that sort of 30,000-foot view of kind of how the whole thing is supposed to be working together, which it's really easy to get mired in your own sort of headspace when you're trying to solve a problem. So this is a great, you know, again, widening and mindfulness sort of approach. But I'll let Cody ask her question and talk more about that piece.
I think it came up when we were doing Suzanne's involve worksheet, because we were, and I have this issue too, but we were looking at people who, you know, because they're a power position, they can provide this, but then actually, would they do it? Like, you know, does that make sense? Like, they can provide something, contribute something, but aren't actually willing to. Or what are they? Yeah.
Jan, do you want to take?
How do you?
Yeah, I think it comes back to a conversation, having a conversation and reaching agreement. And I think if you do the pre-thinking around what you would like them to contribute, and that begins the discussion, and enrolling them in the problem that you're trying to solve and why their contribution is important, and then it's really making a request and seeing if they're willing to do that. And if they're not, then it's okay, what are they willing to do, right?
It's so funny because we had this exact conversation yesterday when we were working together about this. And one of the things that the point I made yesterday was that when you recognize the distance between what you need them to do and what they're willing to do, even before you make the request, there is some pre-thinking that you can do, which is, what do you need to do to bridge these? Like, what's the ask? What is the ask, right? And what is the breadcrumb trail that'll help them reframe what they are currently willing to do to what you need them to do? So absolutely, being able to articulate the gap, I think, is really a useful exercise. And then you can make an overt request, or at least come up with a strategy to narrow the gap.
And
That's
that,
really helpful.
I think that's better than knowing that they're not willing, but still baking that into what you need to be successful, right? Because we're setting ourselves up to know we're going to be short for whatever it is that we're going to provide.
Well, and I think seeing that difference too, and having that specific ask, because all the time you go to someone and try to enroll them into, and Suzanne talked about this, their immediate question is, what do you need from me? How much time? You know, all of that, and having that clearly stated already puts you ahead. So,
and
this is all strategic.
It's all very strategic, right? And this is where you can overlay the 3 dimensions of trust. What do they need? Do they need more benevolence, that I'm not going to be wasting their time or just taking their money? So all of these skills you begin to weave into your strategy.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you, group 2. Now to group 3. Group 3 had 2 takeaways that we really felt like the distinction between care and contribute is a profound mind shift in terms of how we engage with our stakeholders. And we love the map. The picture says 1,000 words. Seeing the system in a network diagram is amazing. All right, so if you have not yet joined us on the big map, big takeaway, here it is in all of its glory, and you can keep this forever and ever and ever. We're going to keep this. We're going to frame it. This is incredible. Shan, do you have any reflections or thoughts, because you were busy copy and pasting?
I think my meta thought is, and we've talked a little bit about this, and you said this also, Joanne, in your last point, but we teach these modules in a linear fashion, but in real life they're not linear, right? And in real life you're weaving and integrating them as we go, and that there's really no right way, right? It's just about elevating your consciousness and your practice of using the tools.
Yeah. So we might clean this up just a little bit, but otherwise this is yours to keep. This is sort of like, capstone-ish project. Anything else anyone else like to say? We have a little bit of time.
We have one question. I'm going to share my screen, Joanne, if we wanted to go to the lingering questions step of our process.
Aha. I think this is Cody and Suzanne's question.
Yes.
Cody and or Suzanne, do you want to speak to this question and clarify maybe what you need in order to feel sufficiently complete with this?
Well, I feel, and you kind of already spoke to it with Sarah's comment about being the laziness. It's not so much a laziness, it's an actual prioritization of your time to make sure that you're integrating it. But just thinking about like a good rule of thumb, like how much time should we be building into our schedules so that we can actually leverage this framework?
What do you think the answer is?
Oh, well, I think it depends on the problem. And I mean, I know for like meetings, like half the time of the meeting you should probably dedicate to the plan. I mean, while we're still building our muscles, I feel like this alone could take up 5 hours of my work week, if not more, which 5 hours of my work week up front is better than 40 hours of my work week down the road. So I think it just depends.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so Shannon's response to every question you've ever asked, Cody, is always, it depends.
It depends.
So you have internalized your own inner Shannon. And really, I think that the rules of thumb are, it depends. Another rule of thumb is an ounce of prevention is worth 50 pounds of prevention later. Right? think about, if you don't prioritize it now, how much time you're going to spend chasing people around, doing whatever, right? Realigning them, correcting their misunderstanding. Like, think about that, because that's time that we often forget to account for when we're talking about project time, because it just is a natural sort of fallout of having insufficient processes for project planning. So think about using some of that time in advance as a prevention. But also, I think, like, one of the things that we've observed at SIA, not to put SIA on the hot seat, but SIA loves to spend an inordinate amount of time scoping things, and sometimes it may feel as though you get bogged down on the situation. And so one of the things that Shannon and I often say is just sufficient. Like, you don't have to get it perfect. You just have to get a good enough pencil sketch. You know, the elephant has 4 legs and a trunk and a tail, and move on. So we do want to balance the spending sufficient time up front with the, like, getting so deep in the navel gazing, you're all of a sudden mired in your own morass of details, right? So there is a balance of art and science as to what's enough. And that really depends upon your culture, the urgency that you have to move, right? The appetite of your team to go deep, right? It's all the things. And so it really goes back to it depends.
And Cody, the one thing I would add is that you'll get more adept at thinking and working this way. I mean, you already have. I mean, in art, working time together, you can do a meeting design on your own, and it happens much more quickly than it did in the beginning. The same will be true for scope and stakeholders. And so I think it's about building in a little bit of time for practice and knowing that it'll take longer in the beginning, but we all get faster as we spend more time thinking and working this way.
True. Just become second.
Yeah, I feel like I need to just build it into my calendar, like hold 2 hours here to work on this, and just make it more intentional.
Anyone else have either something to add to this or another question that they want to throw out there before we move to the buddy gratitude section?
I was going to say the same thing, just rethinking your workday. I think I talked about this with Sarah about defining success. Rethink your workday. It's part of your workday as opposed to adding on to your workday. So you have to rethink it that way. You can, if needed.
Good point.
It's good.
Anything else?
I was just going to say, we have been talking a lot at SIA, at least like amongst a couple of us, that this sort of trying to transition between like big idea thinking, big strategy, and then just like everyday tactical stuff can sometimes feel really exhausting and tiring. And so, yes, being intentional about setting aside time for that and really honoring those boundaries for yourself and for other people. It's like if other people have their calendar blocked, don't schedule on top of it. Don't interrupt them if you know they are in some sort of like, deep thought mode. And then asking people to do the same for you is really helpful. And I have, if anybody's interested in it, I have like a certain process that I go through when I try to switch back and forth. I don't always follow it, but when I do, it's much more effective.
Good. Yeah, I was reading a study. Every time we get distracted by a text message or an email, it takes us at least 5 minutes to re-engage with the work. So if you are allowing yourself to be distracted, it makes this sort of work really, really hard to do because you're just constantly frame shifting and it's difficult. This stuff takes intention to do.
That's helpful. Thank you.
All right. Any more last thoughts or questions? Okay. So let's go ahead and actually we got a couple extra minutes. So now we're in the 12:35 section, and this is a 5-minute section, which means I got to change the clock a little bit. And the question, we're going to put you back in your buddy pairs, and you will have 5 minutes to do a little gratitude expression. So it's going to be 4 minutes plus 1 to just say what you need to say and say thank you and all the things. So we'll see you back here in about 5 minutes.
Nope. It's just us. Did we get like?
Okay. Yeah, we did. We can continue the conversation here.
All right, whatever. I figure like they'll just like, yeah, now it's like just us in the meeting though. Like, where's everybody else? Oh, there's Joanne. Hold on. Hey.
Hi. I don't know how to use that buffer thing. I thought it
That's
automatically
okay.
on and stuff.
How do we,
That's the first.
leave the room, but now we don't have that. Now it just like says, I think we're in our own meeting now.
Are we?
I don't know.
I don't either. Oh, that's weird. Huh. Boy, I don't know how to do this. Damn Zoom. It for some reason it like, oh, there. Okay, Cody's just pulled herself out of it. I don't know what I did with the time.
It's okay.
Let's
We just
see.
need Shannon. We're just
I
missing Shannon.
know. I don't know how to. I think Shannon's waiting to.
And Suzanne. Oh, Suzanne.
There she is.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to.
Stan.
Shannon is like in her own room. I'm trying to. I don't know how to pull her. I don't know how to pull her out.
It's okay.
There we go.
Yay! We all made it.
That's weird, yeah.
I don't know what happened there. Sorry, guys. All right. So, Suzanne, you have to go.
Suzanne has a little bit of time.
Then,
I
Suzanne,
do.
do you wanna just formally check out then?
Yeah.
How much time when do you have to go? Top of the hour?
Like 3:20. I've got a 3:30.
Oh,
I have Suzanne checking out Joanne at the end of the enrolling others conversation.
okay.
Like we'll make space for that. I
Let's
think.
go take a quick break and then come back at 10 up. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pause the thing.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are at our 12:50 or 2:50 slot, and we're going to have a conversation about decision making. This came up a while ago in one of Cody and Suzanne's buddy meetings, and it is something that I think is worth spending our time on. Decisions obviously come up in the context of meetings, they come up in the context of stakeholders, and they absolutely come up in the context of leading and achieving strategic change. So let me share my screen, and I'm going to do a little bit of teaching about decision making, and then we will, why can't I see? For some reason. Give me one sec, I have to monkey with this. Let me try again. Stop share. Okay, great. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, so we are going to transition into decision making. So we, as you know, at Strelo, we love our definitions, and as Joanne says, they bring rigor to our thinking. So we define decision-making methods as the process selected by a group of stakeholders to make a decision. And once the process is complete, it signals to the team that a decision is made. So in this context, the decision method itself is process and the decision is content. So we're returning to our strategic skill of distinguishing between process and content. This is really important in the context of decision making because we often care as much about how a decision is made, so process, as we do the decision itself, which is the what or the content. And when we can separate process from content and we ask a team to engage with and agree upon both of those, we're enrolling the person more completely. So we're, in many kind of subconscious ways, we're tapping into head, heart, and hand because they are now increasing the likelihood of their commitment to the change or to the change that the decision supports. So we're asking them to weigh in on both how will we make the decision, and by doing that, we're increasing their commitment to the decision itself. Decision-making methods are most effective when they're tailored to the situation and to the decision at hand. So just as we design decision-making processes to support the complexity of the meeting content, the decision processes are selected to create the appropriate levels of alignment around and commitment to the decision. So we distinguish again between process and content and decision-making methods. So I want to show you a handful of primary types of decision-making methods. So the first is the leader decides without discussion. So this can often feel to those of us who are involved in a decision as very arbitrary, but it's definitely an option for how we reach a decision. The second is the leader decides after discussion. This is often referred to as consultative decision-making, and a lot of collaborative approaches advocate consultative decision-making. I don't know that I or Strelo would say that this is truly a collaborative way of making a decision, but it's a very common way in organizations. The third, which we experience all the time in our elections, is voting or majority rules. The fourth is consensus, and there's often a confusion between consensus and unanimity, so I want to make sure that we take a minute to distinguish between those. So consensus requires participation, but not unanimity, and it typically if you were being truly collaborative, the group would decide what level of consensus is required to reach a decision. So for example, we might say 80% of us must agree in order for this to be consensus. And we often hear, I think, and when people talk sort of pejoratively about collaborative decision making, and they often talk about, well, consensus takes too much time, or we work through consensus. They're confusing that with unanimity. So a unanimous decision requires unanimity or 100% agreement. So those two things are similar but different. And then the sixth way of making a decision is arbitrary, which could be a coin toss. In my childhood, my mom always had my sister and I draw straws to decide who was gonna, we were in our toothpick. She would break, long toothpick, short toothpick, who got to do, the vacuuming versus the dusting. With my kids, we do a lot of Rochambeau, or we used to. So we can also make decisions in an arbitrary fashion. Again, our decision-making methods are that they're most effective when they're tailored to the situation and the decision at hand. So just as we're designing our meeting processes to support the complexity of our meeting content, we want to select our decision processes to be in alignment with the level of the stakes of the decision. So for a high stakes decision for a group of people, consensus or unanimity may be the decision-making method that we would choose. So I want to pause for just a minute and before we go into, we had some specific questions from Cody and Suzanne that we'll spend some time talking about, but any thoughts or questions from the group just around decision-making methods and that distinction between process and content? Okay. So Cody and Suzanne, these were the questions that you had in your small group discussion. I think what I'd like to do, rather than maybe answering these to you directly, is just have you share a bit of your conversation with the group, and or what pieces of these questions do you still have lingering interest in talking about, and what would be most helpful to you to talk about relative to decision making?
This is Suzanne, and I think if I was interested in this, I guess on two fronts really, is kind of thinking about like wider stakeholder engagement where we might have some, in particular, just to kind of make it tangible, small fund opportunities where we're presenting the community and trying to get sort of like their buy-in, or not their buy-in, I'm sorry, but we're trying to involve them in the process. And then oftentimes the question is, well, like, who's the ultimate decision maker? And I'm just wondering what we can do to clarify that. We try to present a process for that seems, equitable, but, tips and tricks. And also, like, what if the process we're presenting isn't what they, want to agree to? Like they would like to evolve it or infuse it with a better practice. Very specifically, like we have these small grants that we want to award in a community. We've often done like a community panel and they've been weighted in that way, and kind of like anonymous weighting, and then we announce the winner. And so like I'm just wondering what we can do to strengthen the decision-making process so it's transparent and it doesn't seem, just so it seems more in alignment with the community, I guess, is a very specific example. And then I think another question I had is just sort of like, if you have a coalition of groups that are coming together and they want to work on a project together and sort of like aligning them, like there might be like a board of 10 ideas, but you can only do one, right? And it's kind of, so far to date, I feel like we've followed that second decision-making process, either like consulting the group, but having
Consultative. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, like, it feels kind of yucky to me, like
Yeah.
second one's kind of just felt like there's something we could be doing that would make it maybe easier or just feel better for everybody.
Yeah.
Data included.
I'll offer my thoughts on both of those, and then I would welcome Joanne and the group to weigh in also. So on the first one around like the example you gave with the grants, I think my first line of thinking, Suzanne, goes towards making that process very explicit and open and clearly communicating the decision-making process in advance of anyone engaging in the process itself, so that they understand they understand how grants will be awarded and what that decision-making process looks like before they choose to participate. And I would say that principle applies, and that principle of transparency. And to me, the way you create transparency is to make something explicit and clear and to share it, right? So if you follow that principle in advance of all decision-making about what is the process we will use to make this decision, then that begins to create greater trust in the process, because we're exposing that process to the people who are participating in it. In that situation, we're not necessarily asking for their upgrades to the process itself, but in just this simple act of saying, here's how we will make this decision, and that they can see that before they choose to participate is helpful. This on the second around how to help a group when you're bringing community members together, I would probably engage in a conversation as a team, as a group. You could potentially do it there, or you could do it in advance. But again, be thinking about how are we going, if the goal of the conversation is to select a project to work on, how are we going to make that selection? And have a conversation about that first. And that's really the first decision the group makes before actually moving to selecting the project. And there's different ways you could design processes to do that, right? If you wanted that to be unanimity, or that would be probably hard in a community setting, but if we go back to these slides, if you wanted it to be consensus, you could design a vote dotting exercise or some way of, some collaborative process that allows people to see where the energy of the group is, and that naturally, and you've made it clear up front that this is how we're going to go through this process, and where we align as a group at the end is the project that we're going to select, which then removes the leader, right, from that equation. But it all comes back to making that choice first and making that clear to the team before they engage.
Yeah, so I guess Mike, and I think this is really helpful. So it's almost, you would recommend, like, for the decision making, it starts off that way. And also, like, as if kind of like in one of those early meetings that you're having, let's say for the second example, where we're just starting to regularly meet and convene with one another, one of the first items of business we should do is the decision making method.
Yeah, if it's a team that's going to be coming together regularly to talk about or to do work, I would say there's a roles and responsibilities conversation, and there's a decision making. How do we as a group choose to make decisions? And it doesn't have to be that every decision requires the same method. Right. There are some you may choose that there are certain decisions that are consultative, and there are some that require consensus or unanimity. But it is about agreeing on that up front, in advance of the decision. Stacey, what would you add?
Yeah, so there are so many different layers to this question. I would say with regards to the first example, so I'm imagining in my head, you know, let's say you have 200 stakeholders that all want to weigh in on this, right? So you don't want to have, voting is actually not something that we actually advocate for. It's those words that I have difficulty with. And this is where actually that having that stakeholder concept is really helpful, in that if you had a process perhaps in which your 200 stakeholders could weigh in, but then there was a subcommittee that would have representation from those stakeholders that would take the input. So it's sort of a blurring of a consultative and consensus. It's like, first it's consultative, then it's consensus to that. So you're essentially, you're winnowing the number of people that are making the decision as you go up, but you're getting all this information, you know, from the stakeholders from the beginning. And again, you know, it really is like Shannon was saying, you want them to approve of the process, and you want to avoid the words buy-in as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
So that's one piece, as a way to try to figure out how do you preserve the fidelity of the input without it leading to a quagmire, right? And it's all in service of trying to make the best decision possible, given that you want to hear from all the voices. So thinking about how you want to manage stakeholder representation can be a principle that you can sort of layer on top of that. The second thing I would say about process is, remember when we talked about, we were talking about facilitating meetings, the difference between opting in and opting out? So it could be in these decision-making rules, you may want to ask the question in two different ways, not necessarily who is 100% opting in to this particular decision, like agreeing, affirming, versus like, and more of an opt-out question is, does anyone object if we choose this versus this? So it's a subtle distinction, but it's a way to maybe clean up feeling like you have to get everybody like 100% like it. So it's almost like a shade of gray between, it's like 4.5, right? There's a way to sort of ask the question, does anyone object if we make this decision versus this? The gentler way to maybe move things forward. The third thing I would say with regards to the team thing, you know, if you haven't gotten that participatory decision-making book by Sam Kanner, I would definitely do that. And they talk about different ways in which like a team can winnow through a couple of iterations, like, and Shannon was talking about dot voting. So it's voting, but not voting for decision-making, is voting to begin to limit your options. So say you're 10 people, they each bring 3 ideas to the table, you bring the 30, you do a round of dot voting that gets you to 15, do a round of dot voting, it gets, so it's essentially, it's sort of an iterative consultative, right? You consult with the group, you squeeze it, right? And then you have to maybe go to a consensus or unanimity model in which you say, you know, here are our 2 priorities. You know, we got to choose one, and this is where your opt-in, opt-out might be helpful. It's like, okay, 5 of you want 1 and 5 of you want number 2. If we choose number 1, the 5 that voted for number 2, do you object that we do this one first versus, right? As opposed to, are you 100% affirmed in? So there's just subtle ways in which you can sort of get at the in-between spaces, which will give you a little bit more gray space to play in. I don't know if that's helpful for you to think about.
Yeah, no, it is.
Important.
I think the important thing in that, when you're beginning to engage stakeholders in that way, Suzanne, is again just being explicit about what's going to happen with their input. Because if they feel like they're going to be a part of the decision making, but they're not, right? And they're really just a part of winnowing. I shouldn't say just. Their input is a part of winnowing down to the top 3, and then some other group or some other people are going to decide. That has to be made clear, or they will feel disenfranchised and disengaged from the process.
And that means your thinking has to be clear, right? You have to be sort of clear who is the ultimate what's the ultimate decision-making rule that's going to.
Yeah, and have thought through that process, right, in terms of enrolling your stakeholders and how to get input and how to make decisions. Like having that map in your, in your mind, but then also on paper, which is shared with everybody as a part of here's how we're going to engage in this process, is incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like what we might need is, I feel like we were explicit and we've like kind of create everything to be like very public, but sometimes, it's just like the time that's passed and people kind of forget, and like maybe almost like providing some sort of communication piece that really kind of stands on its own to maybe walk people through like how we've gotten to this decision-making process.
Yeah, reminding them. Yeah, absolutely. You have to remind them, here's the roadmap for how we got here, right?
Yeah.
We do this because this is how we got here, right?
Yeah. So maybe that's like one of the issues that I struck, like in that first example, I think we could create like a communications piece.
And you should never underestimate how many times you're going to have to repeat yourself. Right?
Yeah.
They either can't hear you or forgot or something else, right? So the more consistency you have in your own messaging, the better.
So going back to your list of questions, Cody and Suzanne, is there anything else that that would be helpful for us to talk about in the last minute or two that we have on decision making?
Just curious if Cody had anything she wanted to add.
Cody, anything from you? She's either frozen or not looking. Cody? Looks like maybe her connection is down.
She's not there. Oh, there she is.
And the one thing I'll add, just in closing, is, and maybe you can think about these if you go back and look at ORID. I had not looked at that process before, so thank you for sharing that. My two thoughts on that was that it looks like an effective process. It does look, or they describe it as if it's the facilitator's magic and that the process is invisible to the group. So I think it would be a way of taking that process and making it explicit, like using a meeting plan. It's also missing an actual decision-making method at the end. So I think with those two pieces added to ORID, it would probably improve the effectiveness of using that as a group process.
Okay, that's great. That was a process that was recommended for the second group, and I was also like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, I mean, as a process for a group to move through, it looks great. It's just that they describe it as invisible and it's lacking an explicit decision.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful.
You now know how to tool it up.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? Sarah, Claudette, thoughts or questions about decision making before we transition? Maybe I'll give Cody a quick text.
And for the SIA folks, we're going to go through this again for SIA. So we'll have a larger conversation about that.
I figured there's more of this coming. I was like, this looks like a precursor to like some coming conversations.
Yeah.
And if you both have specific thoughts on that you want to share with us later about how this would be helpful to SIA, let us know.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm gonna move you guys over just one more time if I can. All right. So we are at our where are we? Our
110.
110. Thank you. Our 110 slot. And we're going to move into a conversation around enrolling others. And I want to share a little bit about my Micron experience and journey of enrolling a large company and working collaboratively and in a very Strelo way. And then we'll have some questions that were posed from you around how to enroll others and some conversation about this. And I do want to make sure, so Joanne, if you can help me with time, that we create the opportunity for Suzanne to check out before she has to leave, which if we're will be right at the end of this piece of content. So with that, I wanted to come back to the quote that we talked about when I think it was in our meetings module, that what we practice at the small scale sets the pattern for the whole system. We used this quote when we were talking about facilitation and leadership, and that facilitation in a meeting is really a microcosm of how we want to show up as leaders. And to me, it felt resonant to return to it now as we think about introducing our new skills and ways of working to others, because what we practice, again, what we individually practice at the small scale has the potential to set the pattern for the system and the organization that we work in. And I think the question is, how do we do that? How do we begin to set the pattern at the small scale? So in sharing about my experience at Micron, I wanted to just give you a quick overview of the company. They're headquartered here in Boise. They're now a global organization. Lots of sales in fiscal year 2019. There's now about 35,000 people around the world. They operate in 17 countries, and all of the work that we did required, when we were talking about work at a global scale, required translation into 4 languages so that our employees around the world could engage with whatever change we were creating. So highly complex in terms of the organization. And this slide shares my journey, and I'm not going to talk you through the sort of the individual things that happen, but try to paint the broad picture. So I started there in 2012. I had spent 13 years prior to that at Accenture, which is a global consulting company, and honestly one of the most progressive organizations in the world. I had recently completed some collaborative training at a different organization, which is where Joanne and I met. And I was new to Micron. I was incredibly eager to share what I had recently learned and begin to create change. And I also had the feeling that when I started there, I'd gone back in time about 30 years. They were far more behind than I had expected as an organization. So in terms of beginning to enroll others, I started with the collaborative principles that we've been talking about throughout this course. So making things explicit, practicing curiosity and perspective taking. Those were really kind of my mental model. And over time, and as situations presented themselves, I began to introduce new tools. So first it was the meetings plan, then it was problem solving, and it was continually looking for opportunities to deepen or expand this way of working. Because Micron was so, at the time, so steeped in a very traditional manufacturing way of working, the way that I was showing up and the way that I was leading was noticed. And so the opportunities began to present themselves to train others and to lead and facilitate collaborative work for large groups. So that was sort of the progression until the winter of 2015. Thinking about my role in the context of how we've talked about stakeholders, I was an influencer. I was an I stakeholder in the role that I was playing. And in the summer of 2015, I became a P stakeholder. So for the first time in the Micron world, I had a team and a budget. And so that really allowed me to expand and to be more deliberate about working and leading in the ways that we've been talking about in this course. So again, leadership starts with self. So I started with our team, with my team culture. I had individuals in Italy, Singapore, and in several different locations in the United States. And in the sphere of our team, we worked consciously to build the culture that we hoped the company could eventually become. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this experience were very much a part of the culture of that team. So leading with head, heart, hand, thinking about how we engaged the Micron team members in that same way. And it was then that I had the opportunity to apply the tools at an enterprise level. So these last 3, click over here, I think you can see my cursor. These last 3 projects where there's the Strelo stamp next to them were global initiatives. We've talked about one of them. But these were the opportunity to define the core values for the company. One of our primary pieces of work was to redefine how Micron looked at employee engagement and launch a new employee engagement globally. And then the final one was doing something very similar with performance management. So reimagining how the company thought about performance management and the experience that our employees had with that. So it was really in the opportunity to lead work at that scale, where I had the opportunity to put all of the things that we've been talking about in this class into practice, into large global projects. So stakeholder maps and problem solving and meeting designs right and left. All of that came to fruition and has really informed what Joanne and I have been sharing in terms of the application of the Strelo method for lead and achieve complex change. On a personal level, I mean, my whole goal in being at Micron, other than getting off an airplane and flying around between Boise and Seattle and being home with my kids, was to learn how to lead global change. So I felt like I had the opportunity to do that, and I'm forever grateful for Micron for that work and what it's now given to Joanne and I and to Strelo.
So I'm just doing a quick time check. It's 3:18. When does Suzanne have to hop off? 3:20? 3:20?
25, yeah, 320, 325.
Let me go, I'll do this quickly, these thoughts, and then you can check out Suzanne. So as I step back from that experience, these are some reflections I have around how do you begin to enroll others. The first is that leadership starts with self. So just being conscious that you are building new muscles and starting with yourself. And to Cody's earlier question about how much time she needs, like practicing is vital. So consciousness and practice are queen. Coaching is incredibly helpful. So having a buddy, having an actual coach. I mean, oftentimes we can't see a situation, a team, or our organizational culture really objectively because we're in it every day. So having a safe place to explore how do you see your situation more objectively and how do you try new tools and approaches can be incredibly helpful. The third is that words are power, and I worked with a guy who would always say to me, Shannon, use your ideas, they're words. So choosing our language carefully and being attentive to the language that already exists in the organization and using that language to begin to influence the way of working can be very, very powerful. The fourth thing is minding your fundamentalism. So for me, in the beginning of wanting to work incredibly collaboratively, I was a bit of a fundamentalist and a bit of a purist. And the unintended consequence of that is you accidentally push people away. So I think we have to be careful about being fundamentalist about our tools and our approaches, right? It's really, we're seeking a particular kind of outcome, and detaching from how we get there can be helpful for us in being effective. Leading with a win-win worldview, which Joanne's going to talk a little bit more about, in sharing our intentions. So when we share our intentions explicitly, it makes us different, and it makes us, I think, appealing to people, and it makes us easier to trust, right? If we think about how that connects to benevolence. And then the last thing I would say is find your people. So it's easier to influence change with others. So find the people who can provide help and support and camaraderie, because it also makes the journey a little bit less lonely. So with that, these were the questions that we had. I do want to make sure that Suzanne has the opportunity to check out. How are we on time? Suzanne, do you need to check out?
I'm gonna need to, yeah, I'm gonna need to check out just because I have to run to the restroom really quick. But
Okay.
Let's see here. So you want me to answer questions first or takeaways? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first thing I'm working on specifically introducing the idea of scoping within our management team on some dedicated problems that we've kind of been struggling to kind of attend to. So I'll be showcasing it soon, probably over the next month. And then advice on the best approach.
No, so the checkout prompt is actually the one in the bottom, which is,
Okay.
what are you most?
So Suzanne, I think just on this point though, like, so that's, you're going to have the opportunity to spend some time with Joanne. And I think that can be a part of your conversation in terms of how will you, what are some thoughts about how you can introduce open scoping to your team?
Yeah, that's right. And then, go ahead.
Well, would you like to spend a little bit of like a moment on this question, or do you want to
The bottom two.
checking out?
I need to switch screens. I guess I was looking at the wrong,
So
not
the-
on the discussion slide, but back to the agenda. Is that where I am?
Well, yeah, so we're letting you check out of the class a little early, which is what are you most grateful about for this experience? And what is one way you feel emboldened to lead change? Or whatever else you'd like. You don't have to answer those prompts. You can say whatever you, but just as a way for you to bring this experience to closure, since you won't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm so grateful to all of you and Joanne and Shannon for your leadership and taking us through this journey. I really do feel now like I was kind of struggling with the last, like our buddy exercise, but it is this culmination of the work. So, and seeing that very clearly now. And with that, it's emboldening me to address some issues that I've been carrying around and knowing needed to be addressed for well over a year. So it's giving me the confidence that and some tools so that I can hopefully address, start having that dialogue within our organization.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And we'll be in touch.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thanks for all your time and everyone committing to be here.
You're so welcome. Bye.
It was so nice to meet you, Suzanne. Bye.
Nice to meet you all and good luck with your ongoing training.
Thanks.
Hi, Suzanne.
You're in good hands. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay, so we have like a minute or so. Questions about, because Cody, I think maybe one of these might have been yours as well, but questions about enrolling others.
Well, I'll let actually Sarah and Claudette go because I can always talk to you about that question offline.
Sarah, Claudette, any questions? You guys live in an enrolled world, Cody. They have the benefit of being in an organization that's fully trained and committed to. It's unusual, right? For their situation is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
However, their stakeholders, their external stakeholders are not. So
Yeah,
that's
and I would say there are varying levels in the organization to which people are committed to the framework. Like some people are like, yes, let's scope it out all the time. And that is not always great because then they get mired in the scoping, like they get mired in the non-sufficient bit. And then there's like a good happy medium. And then there are people who are like, scoping is for the birds. I'm just going to do what I want. So, I mean, it's not, it does not fix all things all the time, but it does help center us in a lot of discussions. Yes.
And I think to Shannon, Shannon, to your description of your work with Micron and like going into an organization that was not used to these skills and resources and being able to just show it by your work, and then slowly people started to notice and wanting to participate. I think that is that's how I will need to show it. It's not a forceful, this is a great tool, everyone should use it. It's oh, Cody leads really effing awesome meetings. What is she doing? How can we pull that in? So
Yeah.
that answered mine.
Absolutely. Yep. Great. Thanks, Cody. Okay, JC, I think we're ready to
All right.
transition.
Thank you. That was lovely. Let's move to the 125 item. We're talking about win-win that Shannon just teased you on in the last section. I'm going to talk to you about win-win or about worldviews in general. We'll take your questions and thoughts, and then we'll do a last step of counsel, which is in what one way might you better operationalize a win-win worldview? So that'll be our process. So go ahead and yes, so we're on the deck. Go ahead to the next slide. Anyone want to just sort of offer what they think a worldview is as their definition? No thoughts, no takers?
Worldview concerning projects or
just in general. When I say, what's your worldview? What's your definition of worldview?
And I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think when you say, what's your worldview? That to me sort of encompasses like, what is your experiential, cultural perspective, personal perspective on basically everything? Like, what's the lens through which you see everything?
Good. That's pretty good.
Okay.
So, and that's the reason why we have this image here, sort of the glasses through which you take a look at everything. Thank you for that. Brave Sarah. So here's our definition of worldview. I think you said experiential, historical, cultural. So we distill that to a fundamental cognitive framework through which you interpret, so make sense of, and understand how the world works. And it informs how you interact with it. So it informs your relationship to the world. The Germans have this lovely word called der Weltanschauung, which essentially is, no German speakers in here, I take it. The Weltanschauung, which is a lovely word, which is essentially their version of worldview. So how you interpret and understand and how you interact with it. Otherwise known as the glasses through which you look at and interpret the world. That's the reason why we have this image. Oftentimes we are not aware of what those glasses are because we were sort of born with it, raised with it, we can't take them off. So it's a really difficult thing to talk about because you can't take them off and when they're dirty because they're kind of stuck to our faces. But it is useful to sort of begin to get curious what our worldview is. So go ahead and go to that next slide. I'm going to present to you a couple of different ways in which we can think about worldview. This is one of my favorite books from the aughts. I think it was 2011. This book made a huge splash and it's called Tribal Leadership. And it articulated 5 essential worldviews that we carry around with us at any given time. And one of the really lovely things about this framework is it essentially said you can actually intentionally progress, like swap out new lenses as you go throughout your life. And these worldviews can be distilled into either life sucks in general, whether you, if you're belong to a gang or, is somehow disenfranchised, that everybody, no matter where you are, life just sucks in general. 2, the next evolution of that is my life sucks. And we often pick on people like the folks that work in the DMV or, some other disenfranchised postal office workers, which is the recognition that my life sucks, but not everybody else's life sucks. And then from there you evolve to a different worldview, which is I am great, but y'all suck, right? Which is the flip side of that. And then ideally we want to move into a we are great, and then finally culminating into the sort of Dalai Lama life is great, which most of us never get to. So this is a kind of a very sophisticated kind of framework of a 5-stage process that you may or may not move through your life, but just sort of being aware of where you are in this particular framework. I found it to be kind of interesting, and it's easy. My life sucks, your life sucks, I'm great, we're great, life is great. Go to the next slide. When we talk about worldviews, we often talk about it in much more simplistic terms. And one of the worldviews, and it's really interesting because, when we start really thinking about how we imagine the world, one of the ways we can think about the world is as of a zero-sum game. So there's a finite amount of stuff, reward, good things, bad things, and it essentially means that we shuffle around who gets what in this sort of zero-sum game. So the pie is a finite size. If I get a slice of pie, that means you get a slice less. What I really think is really interesting about this is we all play different versions of this win-lose and sometimes lose-win worldview. So in a win-lose worldview, it is a very I-oriented worldview. In order for me to get something, you need to get less. Most of the time when we play a win-lose worldview, we actually don't want you to lose per se, but we often care more about what we want and not so much about what you want. I often, I think about like medical professionals COVID aside, you know, when anytime like a specialist says, well, you just need to do this, right? They're not really interested in the enrolling part. They're not interested in benevolence or your perspective. They're just interested in like telling you what they think you should be doing or telling you what they need, and they don't really care what you need. So that's a very I-oriented worldview. And again, the pie is fixed. So either I get something or you get something, but we can't both get something. A particularly insidious version of win-lose is actually a lose-win worldview. And women in particular are prone to this worldview. This is a very you-oriented worldview, which means that somehow we believe in order for you to get something, I have to get something less, right? It's a victim mentality. It's a self-abdication worldview, which is I care more about what you need or want. This is a sacrificial, the woman of duty and honor, right? They're willing to sacrifice everything for everybody else. So I care more about what you need or want. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I can take the leftovers or the smallest piece of chicken because I'm not willing to examine what I truly need or want. Fixed worldview. Somebody gets more chicken and I don't. Next slide. A cousin of the win-lose, win-lose, lose-win worldview is another interesting zero-sum game, which is called lose-lose. The focus is less on a win as it is on minimizing that we're both going to lose, but I want to lose a little less than you, where no one wins. And interestingly enough, when we talk about what is fair, we're actually talking about a lose-lose worldview, right? So, and when we think about mediation, it's often we're trying to mitigate our losses, right? We're compromising, we're negotiating because it's a fixed pie. Fixed amount of money, fixed amount of stuff. And we got to figure out what is fair in terms of allocation. Again, a fixed pie mentality of, well, what is available to be won? So we all engage in all these strategies. And so it helps us to develop some awareness when we are playing these strategies out in our lives in an unexamined way. Let's go to the next slide. So the last sort of contrast that I want to present to this is a win-win worldview. Now, sometimes people poo-poo win-win like it's a Pollyanna strategy, as a kumbaya strategy, but it actually isn't. It is a very intentional way of engaging in a world which says the pie is not fixed. And our belief that the pie is fixed is actually based upon attachment as to what we are talking about. People often say, well, money is a fixed pie, isn't it? And what I would say to that is money is a proxy often for something else. Money is a proxy for value, honor, reward, right? So when we talk about money, yes, money itself is a fixed pie, but when we're talking about what money actually symbolizes, it actually symbolizes something else, right? And so when we are playing a win-win strategy, it is a different kind of mentality, which is much more of an abundant, creative thinking way of looking at the world, which requires you to be a little bit more curious. So we've talked a lot about curiosity throughout the course. It involves you to be creative, right? I might only have $10 that I can split between Sarah and Claudette, but what is this $10 actually supposed to be symbolizing, right? It will require us to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more curious as to what these $10 symbolizes so that we might create some generative possibilities of what other things could be possible. It also requires a non-attachment to what we define as a win, right? I might not be able to give you a salary increase this year, but what I can do is offer you a little bit more PTO, right? Or something, right? So as a way to honor your time and contribution to the organization. It also requires you to have the ability, and one of the things we've gotten really good at throughout this class is the ability to really identify root cause and the real problem we're trying to solve, right? The ability and willingness to identify the true issue, concern, or problem to be solved, right? Again, money being the easiest thing, status, honor, value, all these things. And it allows us to operate a place from integrity. So we talk about our integrity being in values. It allows us to operate from a place of we want this to work. It is a we-oriented worldview. And it is not a particularly easy worldview to operate from, because I think traditionally we just sort of naturally grew up with a fixed zero-sum game mindset and worldview. Next slide. One of my favorite ways of thinking about worldview is this. This is out of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective People. And one of the ways that we can think about how we can move from one quadrant to the next is to think about this as a 2x2 grid, in which on one axis we have courage. And that is the courage to examine what we need, what we want, courage to advocate for oneself, for what we need and what we want. And so as we move from low to high, right, we move from a lose-win, oops, that other one should be win-lose. One of these should be flipped. The bottom on the right should be win-lose, that one should be, so we move from a win-lose mentality towards a win-win mentality. Thank you, Shan. So that's on one axis. On the other axis, on the y-axis, it's consideration, right? It's that empathy, that perspective taking, that benevolence, everything that we've talked about. So you can imagine at low consideration, I don't care what you want. Low consideration. And I have no, this is actually all jacked up. Actually low, it should be lose-lose. I think I didn't quite finish. So yeah, that one should be lose-lose. So low courage, low consideration. I'm not willing to advocate for myself and I don't care what you want, right? High courage, low consideration, win-lose, that's correct. And then low courage to advocate for myself, too much consideration for you, lose-win. But if I have a high degree of courage to at least investigate and be curious about what I want and also consider what you want, you create the conditions for a win-win worldview. So I think it's really interesting. And you know, it's not about judgment because we play all of these strategies all the time. It's just a matter of developing a little bit more awareness. I'm going to pause and just see if anybody has any questions or thoughts or comments. And Shan, since you know this is the first time you've heard me talk about this, if you have anything you want to add as a color commentary.
I think one of the things when I was first beginning to think about win-win, and I think this is hard because it's not something that is encouraged in all organizations, is our willingness to speak for what we need. I think it's a little bit of how we're conditioned as women, particularly in our culture, but that for me was the beginning of really being able to engage in win-win.
It's the mind shift from selfish to courage, right? We're told that that's a self-advocation is selfish, and Stephen Covey would call it courageous, right? When you're willing to stand up for yourself. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Any thoughts or questions from the rest of us? In that case, I have a question for you, which is go to the next slide. Does anyone have any initial thoughts as to why we would end this course with this sort of philosophical conversation about win-win after we've gone through this journey together? So what do we now know that allows us to be able to enter into a more win-win worldview? Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Cody?
Well, I think it's, being able to engage others in your decision making. Like if you have high consideration by following this, process, as well as, giving yourself the courage to lead it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how I'm taking away with it. That win-win consideration courage. That was great. That was good to see, to make that connection.
Yeah, it makes it more concrete. Claudette?
I would say it makes it seem more achievable. Like if you had presented it at the beginning without us seeing all of the tools that that we've been taught over the past couple months, we might have been like, oh, this is just some fluff. This is not, this is just a pie in the sky type idea. But if we have the tools, we can say, oh, this may actually work.
It's funny. I've made that mistake before. I used to teach it the first week, and I got shut down so fast that I was like, ooh, it made me really gun shy to teach win-win, because they're like, we don't believe any of this stuff. This is ridiculous. How could you possibly, right? So, Sarah, do you have anything you want to throw in there?
I don't know yet. I don't know. I feel like I'm still processing it.
Okay,
I think, I mean, yes, I agree with what Cody and what Claudette said, that both of those things really resonated with me. And I think that it's something we struggle with so much. I know I struggle with as a woman, particularly this idea of win-win and selfishness versus courageousness. Like, where is that line? Both professionally and personally. So yeah, like I want to think about it more. And I don't know that I buy into it totally, because I feel like there's that voice in my head that's like, is it really though? But I like where you're going, and I'm hopeful, which I think is maybe I would have been less hopeful at the beginning.
It's about developing awareness. So
Yeah.
let me say a couple things, and maybe this will actually help you. So when you actually take a look at the Strelo method, and we're not going to go through the whole thing again, but so head, heart, hand, right? Head, heart, hand already allows you to begin to, because of the heart piece, because of the curiosity, because of the empathy and the perspective taking, right? And interestingly, I think self-other system actually lends itself to the win-win worldview too, because it begins with self, right? You begin to identify what you need. You have the ability to adjust your perspective for what the team needs, what the group needs, and also be able to have the perspective of what the system needs. So it at least creates space for you to, maybe there isn't a win-win solution, but at least it gives you space. So even when you're starting with the fundamentals, we're beginning to create a little bit of breathing room for us to explore win-win as a possibility. And then if you take each of the elements, right, lead, clearly, 3 dimensions of trust is all about win-win, right? It's all about creative, generative possibility. Meet, when we're making conditions explicit, you're creating the possibility of people being able to show up and being able to be more expansive in their thinking. Same thing with solve, and of course involve. It's really a win-win strategy. It's a very serious, big cojones win-win strategy in which we're saying we need our stakeholders to be, we want their engagement. We want to hear from them. We want to include them, right? So already, if even without even knowing it's a win-win worldview, each of these elements has sort of baked into this, the assumption that a win-win worldview is actually a better, right? When we think about win-win being expansive, generative, creative, more integrous, like all those things. But it is interesting to at least make a choice what pair of glasses we want to put on at any given time, whether you believe in it or not. And so if your default is win-lose, I think it's useful to go, okay, well, what could it possibly look like if I were to play a different strategy, if I were to play a win-win worldview as opposed to a win-lose? Or even more helpful, finding yourself in a lose-win worldview to go, wait a minute, I'm playing a lose-win game. What kind of bullshit is that, right? And then, and to be truly honest with yourself when you are playing a lose-lose strategy as well, because we do it all the time, right? So it's, again, this nimbleness, this flexibility to think about it. I think that's, so let's just do a one real quick round of counsel. Oh crap, we're a little bit over time, but I think it's okay. Let's just do a real quick, what's one way, so the council prompt is, what's one way, and we'll play too, Shannon and I, what's one way in which you might be able to better operationalize a win-win worldview, if you were to so choose? In any order, you're ready to speak.
I'll go, Joanne, I'll start.
Oh, okay, thanks, Jen.
And one thing for me is a reminder to continue to stay detached. I get attached to my way, my sense of rightness. So reminding myself to stay detached is helpful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Claudette.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, thanks. I just keep going back to being more curious. So not assuming I know where the other person's coming from, but to actually ask them, and that takes courage a lot of times, because you might not like the answer, or it may not even be what you even thought, but you don't know until you ask. So that takes courage.
Thank you, Claudette. Cody.
So Claudette and I are on the same wavelength. I was saying like thinking about being curious and not creating my own assumptions prior to asking, the questions. So, and Claudette, bringing that back to courageous, that was great. That was a good connection.
Thanks, Cody. Sarah. I love watching Sarah's gears turn in her brain. Really
I have my husband likes to say to me all the time, you're making that face too loud. So I am always very expressive. So, but yeah, I think because I was going to start with benevolence, but then I felt like that maybe would be a lose-win situation if I'm like giving up. So I have switched it in my head now to empathy, because that needs to be empathy for self, other, and even system, like empathy for the system as it is, so that it can be win-win. And I think that, to me, that's like the root of the root. We all feel so little sympathy for ourselves and for other people in general. We're so quick to judge and shame. So I think that's probably like the crux of like a lot of our human issues.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
And I would say for myself, it's the consideration piece, like really getting curious what the other person needs without feeling like I have to give something up, right? That just a detachment and just being curious about what they might need, what they truly need. Awesome. All right. Great. Thanks, guys. So that concludes Win-Win. And let's go ahead and move quickly because we're about to run the clock down to next steps. So now we're starting to the final stretch here. So just a reminder, we have a couple of resources coming out of this class, and you'll be able to keep these forever and ever and ever. So one of them is our lovely Google folder with all of our cornucopia of things. So you click on there, you'll see all of the folders. We'll probably stick some of these other things in folders too, but they're all nice and tidy and organized. The slide decks and the handouts and the buddy calls and everything. If you haven't been using this yet, it's all there. So that's it for you forever and ever and ever. Something that
I think Claudette has a question.
I think there were only 3 PowerPoints on the folder. I think it was just missing one.
I uploaded, there it was, Claudette, I had forgotten to upload last week, so it should be there now, but I will double check that there's a PowerPoint for every class.
It's
okay, thanks.
I'll double check.
Yeah, Solve is still missing.
Is it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay,
So
my bad.
Yep, thank you, Claudette. We also have a YouTube play channel, a YouTube channel for Strelo Group, which we have all the recordings. Thanks to our, what do we call him? Our video.
The Strelo videographer, otherwise known as Shannon's 16-year-old child.
Yeah. So it has all the videos. If you want to go back and re-listen to anything, you may.
I will just say on that one, struggling a little bit to manage performance to get the last final videos up, but we'll get there, I promise. But we're like halfway through the class.
Excellent. All right, so that's the resources. Any questions about that? So everything that we've ever covered in this class should be in that folder. The second step is we're in the process of putting together a feedback survey to get your input. We're still prototyping. This is the first time you guys are actually the first people to actually see the Strelo method in its full glory. Most of the people that see have not seen this, so this is kind of, yeah, it's kind of fun. So we are still in the iterative, and we do want to get your feedback, and so we would ask for your benevolent and constructive feedback, and honest feedback, so we can help make this a better product. You'll be getting that link hopefully in the next 24 hours, maybe. Maybe today, unlikely today, but we'll see. You'll get something. And so, so thank you in advance for completing that survey. We may actually follow up with just maybe just chatting with each of, I mean, because we know where you live, so we're going to talk to you about your feedback on that course. Oh, and Shannon would like you to email each of you. Will you mind emailing her, and go ahead and CC me, your snail mail address, your mailing address, so that we might have it since we only have your electronic email. Shannon, anything else? All right, in that
Okay.
case,
Shall we check out?
we'll move
Okay.
it back over to you.
Okay. All right. So our checkout prompts for concluding our class are 2 questions. What are you most grateful for about this experience? And in what one way are you feeling emboldened to lead change? So we'll take a minute for you to reflect silently, and then we'll check out. All right. Who would like to go first? Cody, you want to go?
Yeah, I can go because I don't know about my internet connection.
Okay.
But I am feeling most grateful for the growth that I've seen in myself and the connection that I feel to this group. And then one way I feel emboldened is that I now have a higher confidence level to actually think and act strategically. So
Awesome. Thank you. So glad you've been with us. Sarah or Claudette?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to learn this fully. I'm grateful that CM makes this a priority and wants us to do this, and just a way to like better operationalize collaboration. I mean, I think it's something that we probably all desire, and I know I have desired it in previous places and not really felt like I knew what to do to make those changes. And so this gives you like a really clear path to do that. And then kind of to that note, what I'm taking away is I feel equipped. Like I have the right tools and resources to do what I want to do. Like I feel fully equipped now, whereas I felt like maybe I had pieces before, or like I sort of got it, but not all the way. But this kind of is a much more complete process, which is so good.
That's awesome. Thanks, Sarah. I'm really glad. Thank you. Claudette.
So I'm grateful the same. I'm grateful for the partnership with Thea and Strelo Group. It made joining, starting a new job in a new world, a pandemic, much smoother than a lot of other organizations. And you know, that goes to show how good this program is for its foundation, setting a good foundation for success. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for the heart, hand, and head aspect, especially because it makes it more, it makes working more success more comprehensive, not just focusing on one part. And the last part was, how do I feel emboldened? And same way, I feel like I have a lot more tools in my tool chest, and just, but a really comprehensive and really good tools to use.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudette. JC.
I am grateful for so many things, but I think the main thing I'm grateful for is for having all of us go on this journey in which, and you trusted us as to where this would lead you. And you know, it really played out on the day that we did scope, that we did solve. That was a microcosmos of just starting in a place and just trusting the process, not knowing where it was going to take us, but trusting it was going to take us to a better place. And so I really want to express a great amount of gratitude to all of you for just being with us in the journey and not having any idea where it was all going to go, because we didn't either in some ways. And so I'm so grateful for your trust, for your commitment, for your attention, your intention, and your hard work. And this is, I know you guys have full-time jobs, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and the world coming to an end, and you hung in there with us. And so that was amazing. So much gratitude about that. And the one way I'm feeling emboldened to lead change throughout this pandemic, I have found myself again and again and again going back to the foundations: self, other, system, head, heart, hand. Self, other, system, head, heart, hand. And there's something very, it's a deep well, right? It's a very, very deep well. So whenever I got lost, it was almost kind of like I could go back there and kind of going, okay, what problem am I solving? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this for others? Like and the 3 dimensions of trust, like among those 3 things, I just felt myself kind of, when I felt lost and just unable to sort of carry on, I would just sort of kind of go back to that. And I found it to be very emboldening. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Cool, thanks. And I will check out by saying that what I am most grateful for is very similar. It's the experience, right? And the opportunity to be with Joanne and to be with the 4 of you to put this together for the first time. And in being able to do that and to create an experience, it deepens our learning and our leadership every time. So thank you for that. And I am feeling emboldened. The world needs more heart-centered leadership, and the world needs more change with, not change to. So I'm feeling empowered and emboldened that this work resonates and that there's now more of us to lead and work in this way. So with that, I think we are complete.
Oh,
I know.
all right. Well, we'll be seeing each other again. So
Yeah, we will. Okay, thanks
bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
It was amazing.